Hey y'all, it's Troy, and I thank you for watching this particular video. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about is something that I put out there as a campaign issue that I am going to stand for not only now, but in the future. And this is something I've been clamoring about for years at all levels of government, but including here in Selma. And wasn't very popular with town council or the leadership of this town back in the 1990s when I saw some things that were overly restrictive that the town was trying to do. I understand why they were doing it, I just didn't agree with their doing it and the reasons why. But in the planning board, I've served on the planning board back when one of my sons was a newborn. And I'm serving on the planning board right now. And one of the things that I look for is stuff that's overly restrictive. I tend to side more with liberty, more on the libertarian aspect of things. I'm very conservative on a good many things, but actually even more so libertarian when it comes to things. And that has been a source of contention with me on the planning board with some others in times past. Not so much now, because I think we got a few more people who are a little like-minded in some areas, but also leadership for the planning department is very different than it was before. All right, but something that I've got printed right here on one of my postcards is to stop overly restrictive policies, and below that is to create business-friendly environment. And those kind of go hand in hand. It also applies to you, an ordinary citizen. So, actually I'm wearing one of my campaign shirts that I had from way back in the day, 2005 or so. It's kind of old and ratty, but I had to put on something old and ratty because I was just doing the home repair and improvement thing, unstopping a drain, and I didn't want to get goop all over my nice, good, modern day, a lot more expensive looking campaign shirt. So I'm wearing my old ratty one from some 14 years ago. But one of the things on the planning board that you got to remember as a citizen, this town only has about 6,800 people as of the last census data that I looked at. And it was anywhere between 3 and 5 square miles, depending upon who you ask and what your source is. Along with that comes regulation for an orderly society. And I don't have any problem with having rules and regulations that we play by as ordinary citizens. But there is a way that the town can be far more restrictive than we should be. If I wanted to live in a very restrictive town, I'd have moved to Cary, quite honestly. And I don't feel like living in the town of Cary. I don't want them to tell me what color I can paint my fence and a whole lot more stuff that comes along with it. But right here in the town of Selma, see this? On the planning board, I've got this. This binder is the Unified Development Ordinance. This is not all of the ordinances that are in place here in the town of Selma. This just happens to deal with planning and zoning, and that's it. Oh, no kidding. I'm telling you. There are some things that I have a problem with and have had a problem with. There are some things that, yeah, they're necessary. You don't want somebody building a great big house on a tiny little lot where their house goes right up to the edge of their property. There need to be some setbacks that are reasonable. You can't allow people to let their grass grow to be a hay farm in a residential area. That affects me. Matter of fact, it has happened. We're right next door that it happened. I shared that in a previous video. There are some common sense, responsible things that you as a property owner or as a citizen should be abiding by. But there's times when they can be a little too restrictive. And one of the things, I went through this, some 335 pages or so of the UDO, because we had to go through and we're working to revamp through to comply with state law that has changed, but also things that we definitely just need to make a few changes in how things are set up. And I jotted down some things that I thought were a little restrictive. And quite honestly, I had submitted those to not only the chairman of the planning board, but also to the planning director for the town. And Only one of these issues was even addressed, and that was just kind of on the sly during conversation during a normal meeting. Still not a sufficient answer to the question. So I'm going to run through just a few examples for you guys, and these are just plucking a few of them out as I'm going through, things that we really should be dealing with. I mean, there are building height limitations. All right, you don't want a skyscraper in the middle of downtown, okay? I get it. But also dealing with stuff like antennas. One of the things that bother me, if you are a ham radio operator, then you have a setback that you have to have for the height of the tower and how far from the property line your tower can has to be, so that if it fell, it wouldn't fall and actually touch some other property. And it seemed a little restrictive. I mean, for instance, I've got a big old tree in my backyard that's a pecan tree. If that pecan tree falls, first of all, it's taller than the limitations on ham radio towers anyway, but it's not subject to the same clearance to fall to the edge of my property. Like any building actually can be closer to a property edge. And when I submitted that, it was mentioned real quickly off the cuff that, you know, FCC regulations would deem that it has to have that kind of setback. Well, my response to that is simply this: if it's already covered by FCC regulations, or FAA even, not that FAA would cover a tower only 50 feet tall or 40 feet or whatever, the deal is, if it's already covered through the FCC, it's something we don't need to cover here in our town ordinance for several reasons. Number one, the FCC regulations do change from time to time. Those are settled in Washington, D.C. with great public comment. We don't need to be enforcers for the FCC. We're not on their payroll, and so we don't need to codify that into our town ordinance. So we don't need to be enforcing that for another governmental agency. So we don't need to do the double restriction. Furthermore, should they change theirs, we're still stuck with the old regulation here as town ordinance, and it doesn't need to be such. All right, so that's kind of my philosophy on it. If it's covered somewhere else, why the heck would we want to do that and double enforce it here? It doesn't need to be a town ordinance violation when it's already a violation of some other agency. Okay, so here's another simple question that I had. My wife, for instance, and her sister jointly own a piece of property down in Harnett County, okay, not here in Johnston County. But let's say if that situation was here in Johnston County, you have something where one or more lots in one undivided ownership with sufficient total area exclusive, blah, blah, blah. So they're talking about the buildable lots, and it has to be, it cannot be divided ownership. All right, so you mean that it wouldn't be a buildable lot because my sister-in-law and my wife together own it? Stuff like that. What do we care? Who cares? It's not a town thing. If my wife and my sister-in-law together choose to build a home on property they jointly own, that's their business. Stuff like that. Off-street parking and loading. Did you know that there's a maximum number of parking spaces that are available? What do we care if some business has more parking spaces than they need? And we're talking off-street parking, not on-street parking. I'll be honest with you. If we have a church here in town that decides that they're going to erect a new structure, or even if they buy an entire lot next to them and turning it into a parking lot, what do we care if they turn it into a parking lot that has more parking spaces than we want them to have? I don't care if it's the size of the stinking Disney World parking lot. I don't care. It's not our business. If that's how they want to spend their money and they want to accommodate their parishioners, let's say in my example, then why are we restricting them? Especially if those could be very helpful for us for any kind of a special events. But we're looking at like Central Business District, which like downtown, looking at some of the designs. So we're telling them what kind of designs and construction they can have on their windows. And some of the recent renovations that have happened at some of the storefronts downtown look great. Huge improvement. But you know what? The materials that they use don't line up with what I'm seeing here in the UDO. So our regulations are out of touch. So those need to be updated or repealed, okay? So why are we dictating what kind of materials that they would be used, let's say, for their awning? Did you know that awning shall be made of canvas or treated fabric? Vinyl, metal, or plexiglass awnings are not permitted. Now, you go downtown, you get some really nice looking awnings. You get some buildings that don't have awnings on them. But if you want to put up an awning over your building, it cannot be vinyl, metal, or plexiglass. So instead, let's go ahead and make sure that you have to have a material that will mold, it will tear, it will weather, it'll tatter, it will shred. A hurricane comes along with high winds and you have to replace it because it's not something that's more durable just because we said so. What do we care? If it's a good-looking awning, it's a good-looking awning, you know? Here's one that's one of my favorites, and I actually took a video of what it looks like because I deal with this stupid intersection every single day. I live on Anderson Street going out towards Pollock Street, so I'm on West Anderson going by that Family Dollar sitting there. There is a whole section about parking criteria and pedestrian-friendly street edges, also we deal with stuff like buffers and vegetation and trees. Did you know that there are pages upon pages about what kind of trees that you can use in your construction project? What are permitted, what are not? Kind of, really? And then you're required in some instances to put some in. So here's the problem. Much like I talked about with sidewalks, when you put them in, maintaining them and making sure that they don't cause a hazard or ruin your infrastructure later on is a problem. Out here where we required buffers to be put in with trees now is a traffic hazard because just trying to turn right, do a right turn on red after stop like you were allowed to do up here at the intersection, you cannot see past those stupid trees and bushes that we as a town told Family Dollar that they had to put up, and we created our own traffic hazard. Stuff like that is absolutely stupid. We shouldn't be doing that. I mean, I understand why they do that, but I mean, come on. We have a whole section on dish antennas for your satellite dishes, and I just wrote down this entire section is way too restrictive. Looking over here, electronic gaming operations. So let's say we have some people come in and they want to put in an internet cafe. First of all, okay. Why are we restricting them? Okay, but we get this. We set as a town ordinance that an electronic gaming operation may operate from 1 p.m. until 10 p.m. 7 days a week. Why? Why are we telling them that they cannot open for business until 1 o'clock in the afternoon and they have to close by 10 o'clock at night? I don't care if they're open 24/7. You ever go down to Florida? They're all over the place, electronic gaming places. And I don't know why North Carolina is so restrictive on them anyway. It's none of our business, really, to regulate that kind of business. If that's where people want to go and they want to spend their money, fine. Have I been to a few of them? Yeah, just because out of curiosity. I was hanging out with my cousin one time, and my cousin said, hey, let's go. We were hanging out in Florida, Jacksonville, Florida area. He said, come with us. We'll stop by one of these, go play some games. Okay, cool. So we did, and my wife actually came out ahead. Out of all of us, she was the only one who came out ahead. But why do we care? Why are we making moral judgments on this stuff about electronic gaming operations are prohibited in or as part of any check cashing facility? First, we're telling them that, okay, you can't do a check cashing because they might go spend their money on gaming over here. So we're passing a moral judgment when it comes to that as to how people legally and legitimately spend their own money. That's not something we need to be doing as a town. So we're limiting their hours of operation, none of our business. We're telling them they can't be part of a check cashing operation because, they just might spend their money on video games. Again, none of our business. Family care and group homes. So no family care home may be located within 1/2 mile radius of another existing family care home. What do we care? They can't be within a 1/2 mile of another one. I don't care if they open up side by side. As a matter of fact, to me, I would like the idea of a typical or a particular business operation being located close to each other. There are other ordinances here about adult-oriented businesses that you cannot have so many within so close to each other. I'm thinking, are you kidding? I want them, if we're going to cluster them all together in one little area, I'd rather contain it to a certain area, and so they're not spread out all throughout the town. I'd much rather have them near each other and cluster them together for that kind of a business. So I don't know why we think that we have to control that sort of stuff. All right. How about this? Matter of fact, I just mentioned that one. Sexually oriented business. No sexually oriented businesses shall be located within 1,000 feet of another sexually oriented business. So if Adam and Eve opened up a Selma location, they've got one in Smithfield out near the outlet mall, who cares? Or let's say the strip club that we have over here near the interstate. So I would think that we would want them fairly close together in the same district rather than making sure that they're a fifth of a mile apart minimum. Those are my comments on it. Temporary storage facilities, portable storage units. That no temporary storage facility shall be used as a living space or a permanent accessory building. And we had that discussion as well. And actually, a trend now is that people are using large storage containers to build houses, and they're actually very well done, and that's the kind of construction materials that they are using, where they put several of them together and they can actually look fairly nice and modern looking, better than a lot of houses here in town. You can just turn into HGTV and see some of that stuff, and we have. So does that section preclude that? I can understand that you don't want to just have a storage container that came off from a cargo ship dumped in someone's yard and they're living in it. Okay, I get that kind of concept, but if someone wants to use that as a form of construction and actually build a decent home, what's it to you? What's it to us? Maintenance of common areas. The town needs to live up to the same requirements. Because when you look at the person or entity identified as having the right of ownership and control over common areas, recreational facilities, and open space shall be responsible for the continuing and upkeep proper maintenance of it. As a town, we're not living up to that as it is with our parks. Good grief. And yet we're going to go ahead and be restrictive. We've got prohibited signs. You guys ever drive down the road, let's say down Highway 70, and you see those fan-inflated little, the tall men that are waving? Well, guess what? That's a restricted sign here in our town. We're not allowing those. Really? What's it to the town? How about this? Vehicle message signs, permanent or temporary, are prohibited. So, I used to have a pickup truck and running for town council, and I had a campaign sign, actually that's still out in my shed. I actually had mounted those in the back of my old pickup truck. It actually looked pretty decent. It was a decent way to advertise. Guess what? Not allowed by ordinance. Stuff like that. What do you care? Obscene signs and hate speech signs. My only problem with that is it's extremely subjective. Hate speech? Anybody can say, it's hate speech. I disagree with it. Because it's subjective, it can be problematic when you've got stuff like that. There's obscenity. That's pretty much fairly well understood, but in terms of like hate speech, very subjective. Oh, let's see. There are temporary sign ordinances and regulations. So we have violations of that right here, right now. If you go right up here near the Family Dollar, and you've got temporary signs there advertising like the cotton mill flea market or a local church along Pollock Street, under the ordinance that is here, and as stated, those signs are illegal. And yet, for years, for the 19 years I've been living here, we've allowed that. So either we enforce it or we don't. And if we're not going to enforce it, fine, get it out of our ordinances. It doesn't need to be restrictive if we're not going to be enforcing that kind of thing. All right. How about this? Penalties and remedies for violators. Guess what? You get hit with a penalty for stuff that violates stuff, then you've got like 10 days to pay it. 10 days after receipt of the notice, the penalty must be recovered by the town in a civil action in the nature of debt. Okay, so really? That's only a portion of it. I mean, I haven't gone through everything. I went through like 310 out of 335, and those were just some of the real quick ones that stood out, and I wrote down. There's some other ordinances that affect, let's say, if you've got a cardboard box that you're storing next to the stairs underneath your carport. Guess what? Supposedly, no, that's blight. You're not allowed to do that kind of thing here in town. Some things are just way too restrictive, and we shouldn't be micromanaging. Here's a classic example that just irritated me. I went to the last town council meeting, and there was, having solved all of the problems in town, the town council was concerned about, or at least some members of the town council, about the idea that we can see some of these dumpsters that people have got. And they're not like rolling them out of sight when they're rolling them back from the road. And you might be driving down the road or walking down the street, and you might see someone's dumpster that might be actually in plain sight. Okay, so you want them to what? Go put it in their backyard so you can't see it and it's hidden somewhere? You want to hide every stinking dumpster? Now, on the flip side, I've got a place a couple houses down. They leave their dumpster at the road 24/7, which, by the way, is a violation of town ordinance, but we're not enforcing it. So why do we even have that regulation? But the town council wanted to punt to the planning board for the planning board to investigate how we should change our ordinance to make sure that if you have a dumpster, by the way, we have two of them. We don't just have one, we got two because of town ordinance. So you've got twice as many dumpsters with which to deal. They want us to make sure that we can codify in the town ordinance that they will be rolled and stored so that nobody will ever see them, and they have to be out of sight. Really? Having solved all other problems in town, that's what you want to make your priority. I hope you understand where I'm coming from on this sort of thing. Priorities. Some of these are not priorities. Some of these things are way too restrictive, and I can tell you there's a bunch more of them in our ordinances. I've read the town code previously. It's only gotten bigger over time, and that, like I said, that's just dealing with planning and zoning. There's a whole lot more that is under town ordinance that affect you. And so we need to be making a concerted effort to roll back some of the restrictive ordinances. Certainly don't pass any more of them. And, if you're going to enforce them and you wanted this town ordinance, you better enforce it. I remember a quote, I thought it was Abraham Lincoln, but I may be wrong, and it may be one of those, urban legends kind of thing. But the best way to get rid of bad law is to vigorously enforce them. I'll find the quote and I'll put it up here. But why do we have overly restrictive ordinances? We ought to have more liberty, and that ought to be our focus.